My name is Emily. I'm a librarian here upstairs in the Oakland History Center. Has anyone here ever been to the Oakland History Center before? Okay, everybody else, some other day, because this program is not going to leave you time to go up there afterwards, go upstairs, check it out. It's primarily a place to do research about anything about Oakland or the East Bay. So tonight, as you know, we have Santi Elijah Holley, who wrote this book, An Amerikan Family, the Shakurs and the Nation They Created. So I'm going to go ahead and welcome him up.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks you all for being here. It's really a pleasure for me to be here in Oakland tonight. I've done a lot of readings promoting this book and talking about this book over the last year, and it really feels appropriate to wrap it up here in Oakland because, as I don't have to tell you, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense got to start here with Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, and Tupac Shakur lived here for a time and really got to start in the Bay. And sort of it's like a full circle of this book and of this story that begins with the Panthers and ends with Tupac. But it really is more than that. It's really the history of the Black liberation movement from the 60s and 70s and beyond, and sort of the legacy of this remarkable family, the Shakur family. And so I began writing this in 2020, in the fall of 2020, and there's a lot going on in the country. There was racial reckoning events happening just across the country. Donald Trump was still president. We were just sort of had this existential moment of what we were going through with COVID and everything else. And the more I worked on this book and the more I sort of started to see parallels to what they were dealing with in the 60s and 70s. And so as I started going on this book and I was talking to folks, and I talked to a lot of these survivors, a lot of the elders in the movement, a lot of former Panthers, it really became more than just telling a story, a history. It really became sharing inspiration, but also caution of what everybody had survived and things that people might look to when they are getting involved in any sort of social justice or racial justice issues, just sort of look to what this family really dealt with, really what they survived and what they pushed through and where they are today and where we are today as a result of the work that they did and they continue to, many of them continue to do. So what I want to do, kind of just winging it, because I feel like this is going to be, I'm really looking forward to sort of a more conversation. I want to just sit up here and talk for an hour. I'm looking forward to having a conversation about, your experience, being in Oakland and just the work that y'all do. So what I'm going to do for now is read the opening scene from the first chapter. It really sort of sets the stage for the rest of this book and the rest of the story. So the first chapter, first chapter is called The Trial. In the early morning hours of April 2nd, 1969, Detective Francis Dalton of New York City Police Department's Bureau of Special Services Investigations arrives at the door of apartment 9, 112 West 117th Street in Harlem. He's accompanied by 4 additional officers, armed with 2 bulletproof vests and 1 shotgun. On the detective's command, the men light a rag on fire in the apartment hallway and begin shouting, "Fire, fire." The 2 occupants of apartment 9, Lumumba Shakur and his wife, Afeni, wake to the cries and smell smoke. Lumumba jumps up, looks through the door's peephole, and sees the flames. When he opens the door, he's greeted by a shotgun pressed into his chest, while other officers stationed outside on the fire escape enter through the window and hold Afeni at gunpoint. 1 mile away that same morning, Dhoruba bin Wahad is apprehended from his apartment. Robert Collier is taken into custody from his home on East 8th Street. And a few blocks away, Detective Joseph Coffey, accompanied by his own team, kicks open the door of Michael Sechewayo Tabor, holds a gun to his head, and declares, "I've got you, you black bastard. If you move, I'll blow your brains out." Before the sun rises in New York City, 10 members of the Harlem chapter of the Black Panther Party are arrested and jailed, including 17-year-old high school student Jamal Joseph and 20-year-old Bronx Community College nursing student Joan Bird. Other suspects, computer analyst Sundiata Ikoli, Research chemist Curtis Powell, Kwando Kinshasa, Shaba Om, Lee Makubu Berry, and 17-year-old high school student Lonnie Epps are later apprehended or surrender. Suspects Richard Harris and Kwasi Balagoon are already in a Newark jail on earlier bank robbery charges. The three remaining suspects, Larry Mack, Thomas Machina Berry, and Sekou Odinga, managed to get away, disappearing from sight. From the raided homes, the NYPD Special Services teams retrieved 5 .38 caliber pistols, 2 military rifles, 3 shotguns, a pair of handcuffs, items that could be used as homemade explosives, a pair of handcuffs, items that could be used as homemade explosives, a map of Bronx railway stations, a copy of the Urban Guerrilla Warfare Manual, written by Black Panther guerrilla team Captain Kwando Kinshasa. 21 members of the Black Panther Party are indicted on conspiracy to shoot police officers and bomb police stations, railroad tracks, Manhattan department stores, and the New York Botanical Garden in the Bronx. With Joseph and Epps granted youthful offender status, Berry too ill to stand trial due to chronic epilepsy, 2 members already held in New Jersey on the other charges, and the 3 escapees, only 13 ultimately stand trial. The case is formally recorded as the people of the state of New York versus Lumumba Abdul Shakur, but the defendants become internationally known as the Panther 21. The ensuing trial will show the world for the first time how desperate American law enforcement is to eliminate the Panthers and make them an example of what happens when Black people in America dare to assert their right to self-defense and self-determination. This has been a systematic plan by the fascist pigs to stifle the Black liberation struggle in New York City, Lumumba Shakur wrote. Now I realize that the Panther 21 arrest is all part and parcel of a national conspiracy by the American government to destroy the Black Panther Party and all revolutionaries. Now that's the opening of the trial. Now the trial is important. It was important for me to begin with this scene because it was the first time that the Black Panthers were shown and proven to be infiltrated by undercover detectives. There was the trial that came about because of this was the longest and most expensive trial in New York State history. Many Black Panthers were accused of really horrendous crimes. And this is really where Afeni Shakur, who became Tupac's mother, really got her sort of start, her sort of national notice, because she chose to defend herself against the advice of her colleagues, her other Panther friends, against the advice of her own husband, Lumumba Shakur. She had no law training, no legal training at all, but she decided to defend herself during this trial. But the trial itself was pivotal because it showed the whole country, the whole world really, what was going on with the Black Panther Party at the time. I mean, before this trial, people were familiar with the Black Panther Party, but they really didn't know exactly what was at stake. And there's a lot at stake. There's lives at stake. And this trial dragged on, month after month after month. It really took a toll on the Panthers, financially, spiritually, just to themselves. They really saw just how far the government was willing to go to crush the movement, and how far the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover's COINTELPRO was willing to go to crush the Panthers. And during the trial itself, and this is sort of the Oakland connection. Obviously, we know the Black Panther Party started in Oakland, and it grew so quickly across the country that it became a movement where, when it was local to Oakland, they had the 10-point program. There was a sort of a community program where they were involved with feeding hungry school children, going out and watching police interactions, traffic stops, making sure that people knew their legal right during these stops. But when it grew exponentially across the country, there was a lot of clashes between people who had their own idea of what the party should be. And so New York, other side of the country, New York City had their own issues, their own things that they had, their own needs that the community was facing. And they had their own leaders, and their leaders were the Shakurs. And the early Shakurs, the early Black Panther Party in New York, they were at the forefront. They started the Harlem chapter, the Bronx chapter. And as this trial really unfolded, and people were donating money to the cause, donating money to the Panthers for their legal defense, for bail, for whatever, just various legal fees. People were, they had fundraisers. So celebrities were giving thousands of dollars, and people were just sending money. It was just a thing that it was like a cause celeb, to sort of support the Panther 21. But a lot of these funds, a lot of this money, a lot of donations were coming away from the New York Panthers and coming back here to the Central Committee, which is where the Oakland Panthers were, and Huey P. Newton. And so the New York Panthers and the Shakurs were accusing the Central Committee and Huey Newton of misappropriating their funds or taking funds away from their defense, their legal defense. And this rift grew more and more. I mean, the mistrust between New York and Oakland grew to a place where it was sort of there was no coming back to it. I mean, it just grew to a place where it became like literally fatal. And this book focuses on New York, but the Panthers, and when we talk about the Panthers, we think obviously about the Oakland Panthers, but there were so many egos involved, people who really wanted to do great work and do good work. But once it grew to this point, and then there's a lot of people who had their own ideas and a lot of leadership passions. But Afeni, so during the trial, they were, not to give away too much, but they were acquitted of the charges against them. Eventually, in 1971, Afeni gave birth to her first son, shortly after, 1 month after she was acquitted. She got pregnant while she was out on bail. And her son, of course, was Tupac. And growing up, Tupac was surrounded by this movement, the elders and people who'd survived all this, the trial, the repression, the persecution. He was surrounded by all this. I mean, that's the people who raised him, were the people that were directly involved with, this work. So in the book, it's not really, and I say this over and over, it's not a Tupac book, even though obviously he's probably the most familiar Shakur family member. But it was important to me, as an old head Tupac fan, going into this book, I knew a little bit about his upbringing and his parents and his family and what they had survived and what they had done. But learning more and speaking to people who knew him, who helped raise him, was enlightening to see just how much he was connected to this movement, to this history. And that's why we listen to a lot of his lyrics, a lot of his songs and interviews. He seems so kind of beyond his time for a young man, like 19, 20 years. I mean, he was talking about things that really no one else, especially in hip hop, was talking about, because that was his life and he grew up in it. Like, so he's sort of, in this book, he's his presence. He's like running around the, office of the Black Panther Party and just sort of underfoot. And, and then when he finally strikes out on his own, becomes a person and becomes a celebrity, he has this, conflict, this inner sort of turmoil within him of how to honor this history. And doing this book, it was speaking to the people who knew him and knew the family was an honor, and then it also became sort of I don't want to say a burden, but a responsibility to honor these stories. And as I've been going around and talking about it and promoting it and talking to everybody, at these readings and at different events, everybody really just wants to know, like, well, what is the legacy? And that's what I was trying to find my way to in writing the book, is what is the legacy? So I'm going to take a little talking break and read one more little small part. I'm going to read a little bit about Tupac and read the end of this chapter, which I'm not prepared for. Yeah, so one thing to set up the scene. Tupac was, like I said, raised to be somebody who was going to take up the mantle of the party and the movement, sort of carry on the work, because after all the infighting between the various chapters and various cities of the party, after the COINTELPRO repressions, after the FBI repressions, after everything that this movement, the Black Liberation Movement, had dealt with, had just faced. By the 80s, with the arrival of Reagan, with Reaganomics, with sort of the me generation, they were sort of scattered. People were scattered. A lot of them were incarcerated. A lot of them were killed. And Afeni was going through her own personal struggles with drug addiction. And Tupac was raised to be the Black Prince of the Revolution. Like literally, that's how he was told. He was gonna be, which is a lot of pressure for a young man to continue on the work and to sort of save the movement. But he also liked hip hop, and he liked acting, and he liked theater and dancing and ballet. And so he had these two parts of him. It was like the revolutionary movement, son of the movement, and somebody who just liked to party and get drunk with his friends. So there's a pivotal moment in 89, 90 where he was the chairman of the New African Panthers, which was a youth organization started by his family friends, movement elders, to sort of do that work, continue on the work, get kids and teenagers active in social justice, racial justice work. He was a chairman. He was passionate about it. He was going to do that. He went in, full steam ahead with this work. But he also thought that rap would be a good vehicle to get that message, carry that message further. He saw hip hop as being the way to speak to his people, the way to speak to his peers, in a way that just, giving speeches and writing pamphlets really wasn't going to do. So he saw hip hop and using positive lyrics, positive message to reach folks where they were at. He was struggling for a long time until he met this woman named Layla Steinberg, who was his first manager, mentor. They met in Marin City, sort of just by happenstance, just by chance, they just met, and that became, a moment where really Tupac went in this direction of entertainment and music. But there's a moment where it could have gone either way. He could have gone just deeply into being the New African Panther chairman, or the other way. What really started for him was joining Digital Underground, which is Bay Area-based party rap group. But joining this group was monumental because it really changed the trajectory of his career. So this is from the end of chapter 19. Tupac wasn't an obvious choice for Digital Underground. It didn't make much sense considering Tupac's reputation in the Bay as a serious-minded and politically conscious rapper, and Digital Underground's popularity as a party rap group with a leader known for wearing an oversized novelty nose and singing about having sex in a Burger King bathroom. It certainly wasn't the direction in which Tupac imagined himself heading. The path that led Tupac to Digital Underground had been put into motion 1 year earlier by a chance encounter between Tupac and a young woman named Layla Steinberg. Born in Los Angeles, raised in Watts, and of mixed Jewish, Mexican, and Turkish descent, Steinberg had been raised to be politically engaged and race-conscious. She moved to Northern California after finishing college and hosted spoken word and poetry workshops for students. She was also known around the Bay Area as a music industry insider, someone who could recognize young talents, foster their skills, and more important, make the right connections. One afternoon in the fall of 1989, Steinberg visited Marin City to lead a workshop at a local school. She had some time to kill, so she walked to a park, took a seat on the grass, and opened up the book she brought with her, Part of My Soul Went With Him by Winnie Mandela. "Give me a break," said a male voice above her. "What do you know about Winnie Mandela?" The skinny, smiling teenage boy standing above Steinberg told her he had recently finished reading the book and went on to quote passages from it. Steinberg and Tupac struck up a conversation, and despite their age difference, Steinberg was 26 and Tupac was 17, were pleased to discover a close connection between them and a shared desire to use art to promote social justice issues. He came from a family that was driven by this movement across the board, Steinberg remembered. His creativity early on was driven by political activism. Steinberg agreed to become Tupac's manager, though her managerial duties consisted at first of encouraging his writing and sharing and discussing literature with him. When the situation at Tupac's home became untenable, Steinberg brought Tupac to her house to stay with her husband and children. And I just say that Afeni was really in the depths of her drug addiction at this moment, so Tupac was often having to leave home and crash on couches and sort of find his own way. So she became sort of a surrogate mother, Steinberg did, for Tupac. But Steinberg was unable to find anyone interested in taking on the young and untested rapper. Not until the summer of 1990, almost a year after their first meeting, was Steinberg able to attract the interest of Atron Gregory, Digital Underground's manager. Gregory introduced Tupac to Digital Underground's leader, Gregory Shock G. Jacobs, shout out Shock G, who agreed to give him an on-the-spot auditorium in the recording studio, where he was working on the group's debut album, Sex Packets. Jacobs liked what he heard from Tupac, but the group, which already had a full roster of rappers, didn't have much need for another. Jacobs and Gregory hemmed and hawed about taking Tupac on, not committing either way. Meanwhile, Tupac was still a penniless high school dropout with no immediate prospects for the future. Nothing was holding him to Marin City. His bag was all but packed to relocate to Atlanta and lead the New African Panthers. Steinberg realized she was close to losing Tupac for good. That was a deciding factor in what I had to use to get Atron to sign the deal and really get to work, Steinberg recalled. Because Tupac was going to move out there and run the youth chapter if he didn't get a record deal and get that going. Tupac felt he could most effectively reach out to and connect with other young, struggling Black men through his music. But if the music wasn't happening, another opportunity was waiting for him in Atlanta. He felt like he could advance his mission faster and further if he got that deal, Steinberg explained. But he didn't want to sit around if that didn't happen, because it felt like he could go out there and do the work. Finally, that August, recognizing how close everyone was to losing him, Jacobs agreed to take Tupac on tour with the group, not as a rapper, however, but as a roadie and backup dancer. Tupac didn't seem to care. There was money in the pocket and a chance to see the world. But more important, it was a foot in the door. While loading musical equipment and dancing in zebra print bikini briefs on stage hadn't been his original plan, once he got his career going, he would continue to do what he'd always set out to do: represent the underprivileged members of society, and he has explained, to speak for, quote, the young Black males in America in the ghettos. And this is Steinberg again. That was the intention, to stay on a social political path and use the music as leverage and bring the fans to the mission and the work. But the industry has a way of co-opting people's plans and visions because it's so unhealthy. In hindsight, Steinberg continues, now that I'm older and I understand all these other dynamics, I wish he would have gone on to serve the New African Panthers and gotten out of the business in LA and the Bay. Tupac was a rising star. His star would soon be extinguished, but until then, he would burn brighter and hotter than anyone could have dreamed. So I spoke to Layla Steinberg, and this is from my interview with her. And when she said that she wished that Tupac had just gone on to lead the New African Panthers in Atlanta and not even bothered to be, it was heartbreaking, you know, to hear this his earliest mentor, the one who really got him started, say that after witnessing everything that he went through, that she wished that she never had done that. That was really heartbreaking. Obviously, Tupac today, monumental figure, you know, sort of larger than life, really. But I wanted to sort of show his childhood, his humanity, just with everybody in here. Afeni, Shakur, his mother, her humanity. To go through some of the other Shakurs. The late Dr. Mutulu Shakur, which is Tupac's stepfather, in the 70s was a very influential pioneer in acupuncture and holistic healthcare for the community in the South Bronx. Assata Shakur, obviously, you know, I think many of us are familiar with Assata Shakur through her autobiography and her work and her teachings and her writings and her, you know, everything that she's done since she's lived in exile in Cuba, and connect her story to the family and sort of show who the Shakur family is, because, you know, the Shakur family isn't a family in a traditional sense that we think of family, like blood relatives, like Assata, Afeni, Mutulu, Tupac. These aren't all the same technical blood relation family. They're family by choice often, by aligning themselves with this family, with the movement. A lot of them took the name for themselves out of respect to the family, out of respect to the patriarch, Saladin Shakur, who was an associate in Malcolm X and Marcus Garvey. But to take the name, you know, it wasn't light, you know, it wasn't a light thing that you would do just to sort of, you know, you thought it sounded cool and, you know, you took the name for yourself. It was sort of saying, I'm a member of this tribe, this New African tribe, and I'm committed to doing the work for, you know, as long as it takes. And yeah, so tracing all these people, it was challenging because a lot of people who are in the family consider themselves Shakur but don't have the name Shakur. Sekou Odinga is also a very important person in the story, and he's a Shakur, as he'll tell me. But yeah, so to go back to like the legacy and what Tupac means, what the family means, what Shakur means, looking around, like sort of the beginning of the book of 2020 and the ending of the book earlier this year, like the beginning of 2023, it was a journey for me to discover what the legacy was for myself and for others, who are either interested in social justice work or just people who are fans of Tupac, people who know about Assata, people who want to learn more about the Black Panther Party, about the Black Liberation Army, about all these various movements and groups that were going on that were sort of coming out of the Black Power movement. And when I came to trying to define what the legacy was, that's when I wrote. Let's see. I'm gonna write either the introduction or the conclusion. See this way. How is it? Here we go. I'm gonna read the end of the epilogue, and then take questions. And hopefully, it's just a conversation, because I'd love to just chop it up here. Like I don't want to just hear me speak the whole time, but I want to hear what you all have to say. So this is the end of the epilogue, sort of contextualizing who the family was and what they mean today, and also just what the Black Liberation Movement means today, because it's hard to look around and see what to do. A lot of times we feel like, who is doing the work today? Who are the leaders? Who are the people who are really organizing? And what I always say is just like, you don't need to look to people like, it's you. I mean, you don't need to look to people like the Shakurs or anybody else. Oftentimes we get hung up on the right thing to do, the biggest group, who's making the most noise, who's getting the most media attention, who's out in the streets, but as I say over and over again, it's really the quiet work. And that's what the Shakurs are doing, is the quiet work, the community work, like healthcare, organizing tenants, just feeding people who are hungry, just sort of serving the community in whatever way you can. Not waiting for permission from anybody, from the government, from whatever bureaucratic leaders, whatever. Just seeing a need in the community and just doing it. Sometimes teaching yourself. There's a lot of mistakes that are will be made, and allow yourself those mistakes. But just keep doing the work. So work is important. So this is the end of the epilogue. What remains today of the Black Liberation Movement is not immediately evident. Often, today's activists and organizers seem to be bound by nostalgia for the past, a mythic reverence for the revolutionaries who came before. The Black Panther Party is hailed by many today for its community service programs, like the Free Breakfast for School Children program, which has since been adopted by the USDA, providing breakfast to millions of children across the country, while influential Black Power leaders and thinkers like Huey P. Newton, Fred Hampton, and Assata Shakur are venerated by younger generations of activists. But these important figures are often revered and quoted without an understanding of how much they sacrificed. They lived as fugitives, went into exile, served long prison sentences, or lost their lives. They abandoned families and children, many of whom are still suffering from trauma and loss. They knew that standing up against the twin pillars of racism and imperialism requires more than a signature on a petition or a post on social media. It requires more than slogans and yard signs. Dismantling hundreds of years of racist oppression is not an easy task, of course, and there's no single correct approach. But while we are working toward that ultimate goal, there's plenty that can be done in our communities right now. Though the images of shotgun-wielding Panthers will always capture our imagination, the real work is done quietly, without sensationalism or fanfare. It's offering holistic healthcare to the community, organizing tenants against exploitative landlords, or advocating for better education opportunities. It's feeding hungry people. It's challenging all instances of racism, sexism, ableism, transphobia, and homophobia, especially within our own circles. The Shakur name today represents many things to many different people all over the world. To music fans, it might represent the talents and rebellion of Tupac. To younger activists, it might represent the sagacity and defiance of Assata. To movement elders, it might represent Afeni or Patulu. To American law enforcement, Shakur name might symbolize insubordination, radicalism, terrorism. But regardless of what words or sentiments you immediately associate with the Shakur name, one word is indisputable: resilience. The legacy of the Shakur family can be seen today anywhere people are organized, committed, and dedicated to the struggle to improve the lives of Black people here and now. After more than 50 years and numerous attempts to pacify them, the Shakurs remain an eminent, essential, and everlasting part of our American story. Thanks so much. So yeah, if plenty of time for questions or comments, just speak your mind about anything at all about the book.
Sorry, if you do have a question, come up and say it into the microphone. And if someone else is speaking, you can hang out here and wait for your turn. So come on up so that everyone can hear your question. And yeah.
While I'm waiting for the first brave person to come up to the microphone, I do want to say it's really cool to see the display on the first floor of the women of the Black Panther Party, because women really, this book is really, I wanted to give honor to the women of the party who really picked up the pieces and really carried on the work where men mostly fell short. Misogyny, infighting, just ego, hubris, a lot of things happened, and women were there to keep the work going, keep the children fed, keep the parties going, keep the, lights on. And so it's really cool to see that display up there. And there's also a new book of photography of women of the Black Panther Party. So yeah, just shout out to all them. Yes, sir.
Well, thank you for your book, and I haven't read it yet, but I'm going to. I have it here to have you sign it. Really excited about it. This is a sidebar. I worked on a project about 2.5 years ago to recreate the first Black Panther Party off using virtual reality, because for people who have not seen, did not know, did not live during that period. And so the question that I have for you is, what do you think were some of the key lessons you learned? Because I think that's so informative what authors have learned in the process of writing this book. So that's my question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I learned way more than I thought I was going to learn. I didn't know really what the party, how much the state set out to destroy them from the beginning. And just coast to coast. There's so many actions taken against them, violent actions, and COINTELPRO, just the things that they did were destructive, were horrible to look at and to learn about. But then that said, I think the states and their various forces did a good job in causing this sort of rift and this dissension between East Coast and West Coast, which, it's so tragic and unfortunate just to see these, what this party that could have been this nationally unified party splintered, not just because of the various egos of Huey P. Newton and Eldridge Cleaver, but because the government was really fomenting that, exploiting those differences. So it's heartbreaking to learn about that and just to see, this is had so much momentum and so much potential to begin with, but just the full weight of the federal government, the state, the FBI, just focused dead on them and crushed them. So I knew about what the party had faced a little bit. I'd heard that they're the victims of infiltrators, informants. But just the extent of it, just the how deeply they really went in was really heartbreaking and challenging to learn about. Yes.
How did recent events influence how you wrote this book? So you mentioned you started writing this book during the racial uprisings. We saw a lot of important reforms passed, but now we're sort of entering into a new tough on crime phase. You mentioned the Weather Underground. Chesa Boudin was the DA in San Francisco. Right. Tupac's murder was just arrested. There's a lot of interesting parallels to the stories that you wrote about to what's happening now. I'm curious how you thought about this while you were writing the book.
I went through a lot of emotions writing this book, and especially, I began writing this in Portland, Oregon, which is where I moved to LA from, and in Portland was the site of nightly clashes. Like night after night, there was clashes downtown, actually throughout the whole city. Just tear gas. It felt like a war zone. You know what I mean? Like it was. It felt like a war zone. Just tear gas everywhere. Just rubber bullets. Federal police were there. It felt like I was living. Everybody says that they feel like they're living in history, in a moment in history, because what we are. I mean, we're not dealing with anything new. Like this has been done before. So to see this all again, I think I started writing this thinking, this will be an inspirational sort of book for all these heroes, like that persevered, that did so much, that survived all this same stuff that we kind of are dealing with today. But it's not, what I learned is it's not really like that. They didn't all survive. They didn't all come out unscathed. Many of them were very traumatized, and not addressing that trauma, the things that they had to deal with personally and as a party and as a family, unaddressed trauma. So I think, learning, I think we're a little better equipped today to deal with the long-term effects of going out there night after night and facing police and riot cops. Still have a lot of work to do to address that. I mean, people who actually do all that work really just need that sort of support. And so doing this book and realizing this is not just an inspirational story, like a really feel-good inspirational story. I mean, I feel like it is still contains that, but it also contains caution and sort of saying, look out for, don't take it for granted. You can't take for granted what the freedoms that we have or the work that you're doing. Really be on your guard, because a lot of these folks didn't really have that sort of history to look at themselves. I mean, they were all kind of figuring it out on their own, like in real time, what to do, what can we do. And so a lot of missteps were made, a lot of mistakes were made. But now we have the benefit of looking back and sort of saying, okay, we know what to look out for. And we also know that we need better tools just for mental health and for everything else to actually continue on and do this work night after night. Yeah, that's what I learned today. Any other questions?
Thank you. I heard you alluding to your connection with Tupac, and I wondered what was your personal connection to start on this project? In what was it motivating? And then another part of the question is how does the experience, the struggle of the Shakurs and Panther Party kind of lay bare the ongoing violence in the country against all kinds of different people throughout the history, but kind of ending a period of covering that up and exposing it, and now today it feels like it's just a part of everyday life. That transition and comment on that.
Well, with Tupac, okay, so the first part of the question with Tupac, my connection to Tupac, I mean, I was a fan, back when he was still alive, but not like a super fan. I was just like, I just thought he was just this wild, crazy rapper dude who I just really liked his music. And then later on, as I got older and I started doing social justice work on my own and sort of just a little bit of activism, but also just writing a lot, being a journalist and connecting these things, connecting activism and writing and art and culture. I looked back again at his work and his family and his words, and learned more about his background. And I was just amazed that nobody else had really covered this before. And so it's a personal sort of project for myself, because I really wanted to learn more about this family for my own sake. But I kept coming up against brick walls or misinformation, a lot of things that were sort of contradictory in as far as his family. And the more I went into this world and this history, I realized, well, I mean, I'm sure not the only one who wants to know about the Shakur family and about Tupac's connection to Assata and Afeni Mantulu, and Malcolm X. I mean, it's really like how this thread works its way through history. So I just, as a writer, I was just like, well, I guess I got to be the person to tell the story. It was a little bit of just, I don't know what I'm getting into, but I feel like it was really important to me, to other people who might be interested in the story. I didn't, I imagine many people probably my age didn't have a lot of familiarity in school with the Black Panther Party, with Marcus Garvey, but especially not with other groups like the Republic of New Afrika, which is a Black separatist organization that Mantulu Shakur was a part of, the Black Liberation Army, which is what Assata Shakur was associated with. There's all these different groups and people who are so committed, and I really feel like, we are benefiting from this work and from these conversations that they started. So going into that history and learning about it, I was just like, this is a book. I mean, this is not even just a book, this is multiple books. Because, there's so many different ways you can tell the story, and I wanted just to share the story of this family, but it's more than just a family. It's more than just Tupac, it's more than Assata. It's about this whole history. And yeah, today we are definitely, our challenges today, and I'm not an authority on, the work today and people who are actually doing the actual on the ground work. But I can say that I feel like our challenges are a little different. I mean, there are similarities, of course, but challenges are different. I mean, we have so many distractions today to pull us away from doing community work. Those distractions, include social media or just, things that we feel like we are doing work and we're really not in the community talking to people, which is what we've lost, which is the difference between what we had, what we have today and what we had, or what they had in the 60s and 70s, was they actually, if they wanted to introduce themselves to the community and learn about their needs and how to serve them, they actually had to go knock on doors and figure that out. So, I think we take that for granted, that is, you can't serve the community if you don't, if they don't know you. So that's something that I feel like we've lost today that I feel like we need to get back. I don't know if I answered your question, but I just wanted to say it.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about the interview process for interviewing the people that knew Tupac and the Shakur family specifically very well. I can imagine that they get outreached often to do interviews and talk about the family or their connections and kind of tell their sides of the story of knowing the members of the family. So wanted to know kind of what the trust building process was like for writing this and, even getting them to open up to do this with you. Yeah.
It's, it is, thank you for asking that, because it was a process. Before I even reached out to anybody, I wanted to make sure I knew the history of everybody. So I was reading a lot of books before I even reached out to anybody. I was just making sure just as many books as I could about this history, so I know a little bit of background. And then when I began actually reaching out to folks who were party members, family members, it was like this gradual building of trust, almost one by one. I would meet with somebody. We'd speak for a couple hours, and they'd hear that I was, I tried to, I wanted to be sincere and tell them what the story I was trying to tell, not just another Tupac story, not just another story that everyone always wants to tell. I wanted to tell the story, like their stories. So I thought I was maybe too persistent sometimes, but I think showing that sort of sincerity, eventually I would gain the trust of one person, like I said, and then they would vouch for me to somebody else. They'd call them up or send, say, oh, you should talk to this dude. And it was really just one by one, just sort of them passing me on to the next person. It was a long process. Not as long as, I could have talked to people forever. I could have reached out to every single person, but I really wanted, there's specific people I wanted to speak to because they were very pivotal. so of all the people I spoke to, it took about 2.5 years or so to get vouched for, to get recommendations. Also, they would say, you should talk to this person. Sort of traveling around the country a little bit and speaking to people in person rather than just calling them up, cold and saying, this is what I'm doing. I really wanted to be in person, like, and show my face and say, I'm really serious about telling the story, about your story. But yeah, it was, despite all that, that was the most important part of the book. And the important part of the story and the research was the opportunity, really the privilege to share their stories. I mean, it was like, it was a great responsibility that I felt to get their stories right, or as accurate as I could. But that is what I feel like what I'm most proud of in this book is all the quotes from people that I have in here. All just then, there's like large blocks of quotes from them directly, rather than, me just in my own opinion and my own whatever. I really wanted to leave a lot of room for these elders, for these veterans and survivors and family members to share their stories. But the Shakur family, as I was saying earlier, is where they are now. I mean, obviously I didn't speak to everybody who calls himself a Shakur because the family is large. A lot of them are not really active in the movement. A lot of them are just leading quiet family lives, and they just have the name Shakur because they were born with it. Some people just don't do the work. Some people don't want to talk, to anybody else. I respected that decision and their privacy. And in telling the story of the family, it's like the family is really everybody that was involved, everybody in who knew them, who fought side by side with them. Like they were the family, they were the Shakur family. So today, the family members are scattered all over the country. They do their own work. They're pursuing their own thing, and the ones I spoke to, it was an experience that I'll never forget and I'll always treasure, and it's just really cool to see. And I gotta say, I don't know how if anybody's been up to the street, the Tupac Amaru Shakur Way, the new street that was just installed, little commemorative street sign. I haven't been up there. I haven't had a chance to go up there. But has anybody been there? Has anybody been to the Tupac Shakur Way? It's on MacArthur Boulevard?
Yeah.
Okay. It's funny. It's funny to hear about because Tupac, early in his career, many of you probably already know this. Early in his career, about a month after his first single dropped, called "Trapped," which is sort of an anti-police brutality, it was just it's a political song. He was stopped for jaywalking by 2 police officers, and this interaction resulted in him getting beaten severely by the police officers, by OPD, and he was jailed and this was this sort of like, it was this thing that you look back on it now, it's like, oh, it's great. There's a Tupac Shakur street, but I don't know if anything's really been done to address, what I would like to see. I'm just gonna talk my shit here. I feel like to honor, and there's a Black Panther Party Way in New York, in Harlem, which is where the Black Panther Party, the Harlem chapter was. They've put a little plaque on it that says Black Panther Way to commemorate the party after they had gone after them and incarcerated them and killed many of their members. I don't know, a street. I just feel like that's what we're doing. Like if you want to honor these people, honor the family and their legacy and their memory. Tupac. I feel like we need to address mental health. We need to address kids who want to pursue the arts, and also just people who just need support. They don't have it from the family, like Tupac did. Did not. In the Black Panther street in New York, I'm sure they could use like healthcare facilities, places for people to go eat when they're hungry. These are things that are, honor the legacy and honor the memory. So not to, diminish the street names, but I just wanted to say that. It's my piece. Tim, does any questions? I mean, maybe we'll talk, we can read a little more, or we can just hang out and talk.
I don't think we want to go to the mic.
Well, I mean, if you want to the mic, you can just say your question. I'll repeat it into the microphone.
So, given the pressure and the violence that the Shakurs endured, in their political activism, do you fear that telling your story is going to deter young people who are wanting to become more politically active, wanting to become leaders in their communities? I don't know. I can hear these stories and it's scary. And do you think that this book might? Do you have any thoughts about how this book might influence that?
Yeah, I'll try to repeat that for the benefit of the listeners at home. Given what the Shakur family dealt with and faced, am I concerned that younger generations might be put off or discouraged reading about it, learning about it? And I certainly hope not. I hope it's encouraging. And I feel like the more we see these figures to not be superheroes, I think it's better. I think we need to, I don't think we need any more superheroes. And that's not going to be encouraging to anybody who's going to try to live up to this ideal that's really impossible, and then be discouraged when something falls short. The first time they come up against any sort of adversarial thing, or somebody who doesn't agree with them, or law enforcement, or what have you. I think it's more important to show all the faults, all the messes, all the things that they faced, and to show really what they're up against. I mean, they need to be prepared. Anybody needs to be prepared, but also needs to be prepared mentally to not hold themselves to such a high standard that it's impossible to sustain. So I think I hope it has the opposite effect. I do hope younger generations, younger readers will see this and be like, wow, I thought Assata Shakur just escaped prison on her own and flew to Cuba, on her own and did all this stuff. And no, there's people behind her. There's people that worked with her. It was a very well organized liberation from prison, but also a lot of people, because of that escape from prison, a lot of people were targeted and harassed because, police were not happy about it. And so they rounded up a lot of folks, and a lot of people got there, went to jail and refused to testify for the grand jury and served lots of time in jail. It's just, that's part of it. The serious work is going to be, there's going to be sacrifices and a lot of things that are not what you think are going to happen, or you hope aren't going to happen. But I think the more you're aware of it and the more you just think about these people as human, I think it's just better, for us in the long run. Yes.
Kind of as a follow-up to that, you mentioned COINTELPRO and some of the issues that people faced in terms of state surveillance at this time that the party was really active. Today, we face, and activists face, a whole host of other issues, not just state surveillance and digital surveillance, but artificial intelligence, generative AI, misinformation, disinformation that's intentionally seeded in these communities. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on the way that we build community and kind of rally against, as you kind of mentioned, this intentional government seeding of between activists who are kind of pulled apart by these intentional seeding of misinformation.
Yeah, how do we foster community, build community with, technology, AI, everything. This is kind of uncharted. It's really hard to say what we're up against with because it's so early on. And I really don't know how do we deal with that. I know, like I said before, all I really have seen that actually has had an impact as far as where we're at today, not to say where we're at tomorrow, is just not worrying about how to build a movement, but just serving the community. The movement will serve the needs, rather than the needs sort of inform the movement, the work. And the more you learn about what the needs are, that's how you build your organization or your group or whatever it is. Like, rather than forming a group, an organization, and then looking for that need and looking to do something, as you're going to be always chasing something. But if you're just like, what do we need? Like, what does the community need? And then finding other people who are willing, who also agree with you and willing to put in that work with you. But yeah, I mean, I don't go out there. I'm not a young man anymore. When I was young, I was more like boots on the ground. We got to go out there and do the work. So I don't know, like with today, with AI, with everything else, social media, it seems like there's just more challenging rather than, it seems like it should be easier to foster community, but it really is just, it's a little more difficult. And I really don't know what AI, is going to do to I don't know what it's going to do. I think we're all kind of just like waiting to find out. Yes.
I wanted to ask, in your conversation around that thing that you brought up earlier about like unprocessed trauma and just like how like that combined like COINTELPRO and intervention and all those things, like were there any lessons or takeaways from those conversations about like what made the work sustainable, how the care that was able to be fostered within the movement work to keep it going, and if there were times that fell through, and in those, like, was there anything that you or those folks took away that they would have done differently or felt could have assisted better?
Yeah, so it's questions sort of about like trauma and speaking to people individually and what they took away and how they continued on facing what they faced. And especially, I mean, it's something I don't talk about enough, I think, in the book is all the trauma. I do mention it, but especially today, the trauma that people are facing, that activists are facing, individual trauma and collective trauma is something that really needs to be addressed more and talked about more and nurtured. People who I spoke with during the research for this book didn't really talk about it. I mean, I think it's something that, they're of a generation that didn't really speak about it. And I think that's why they continue to hold it for so long, is they just didn't have a place to really do it. I think today we are encouraged a little more. We have more places to do that. But when I was talking to people who did decades in prison or who's, lost a loved one, they just talked about the work. There's always the work, the movement. And I think that's really undid the movement in a lot of ways, where it's sort of, at least in the way that we knew it back then, in the work that they started and began, to be so focused on the movement and the work that you're not really just like taking the time for yourself, to be like, actually, I need a minute. So nobody really, I mean, the people who finally did say, yeah, Afeni suffered from trauma, Tupac suffered from trauma, they're the people who got out of the movement a long time ago. Once they started to realize, like, this is really difficult for me, I can't do this in the long run, I'm not a lifer. They could see it, and they tried to help a lot of folks, Yasmin Fula, Leo Steinberg. They could see the hurt that their friends were going through, and so I think today it's just more important than ever to really address that. So, yes.
Speaking of which, the clinic at, I think it was Lincoln Hospital, Dr. Shakur founded, they were addressing that. They were helping people who are addicted to heroin and offering holistic modalities and non-Western modalities for healing exactly that issue. So if in fact they, were of a generation where they weren't talking about their own traumas, they were certainly trying desperately, to help heal the community's traumas. they definitely recognized that and could see like the pipeline of that into, early days of mass incarceration and just like community destruction that hadn't existed when they were growing up.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so it's about Lincoln Detox, Lincoln Hospital, Dr. Mutulu Shakur, and holistic healthcare, non-Western healthcare. Mutulu Shakur, for a little background, just briefly, I mentioned earlier, he's a pioneer of acupuncture as a form of treatment for drug withdrawal symptoms in the Bronx. Also using a revolutionary framework. What they were talking about in what Lincoln Detox, which was founded Lincoln Detox was in the auditorium of Lincoln Hospital in South Bronx. And they were using acupuncture and revolutionary ideology and history to show people how they were being exploited, and how drug addiction was kind of revolutionary, but it's also just a form of genocide against the people. I wouldn't say that they were addressing just the trauma of being Black and brown in America. They were saying, you're being exploited, they're committing acts of genocide against you, here's how we can treat you, because it's a revolutionary framework, it's a political framework, teaching them politics and history, teaching them about international movements all across the world, but not really so much addressing just personal trauma, just growing up, what you went through individually growing up, facing the trauma that you went through growing up in the South Bronx. It was more just like, if you have a drug addiction, we'll address that, because drug addiction is counter-revolutionary. And they really did care for the people, and they treated them in a way that was saying, we're not just going to treat the addiction, but we're going to get you involved in activism so you can go out there and do the same thing and try to save more people. But it was really mostly just addressing, this sort of collective, maybe a collective trauma, but not so much the individual trauma. It was saying, we just need to get you clean, and then we'll do the work together. But after that, there's still lingering traumas and lingering mental health issues that need to be addressed. But, but even that was revolutionary. Even just saying, we're gonna, we want you to help you kick heroin, but not using methadone, which was the usual way of people were kicking heroin at the time, but using like little needles in your ear and then massage in your ear. And this really started the whole movement, which is still used today, just all across the world. Just thousands of practitioners are still using this. Tens of thousands of practitioners are still using the native protocol, it's called now, which is just acupuncture in the ear, just it relaxes you and just helps with withdrawal symptoms. But Mutulu Shakur was the pioneer of that, and that, of course, made him also a target because he was, finding a way to go to buck against the healthcare system and the government, and saying, so he was a target, and but he remained committed to the people, and I'll say this as sort of maybe a closer. Mutulu did what he did. He passed away last July. Dr. Mutulu Shakur, Afeni Shakur, Assata, Lumumba, Zaid, they all did what they did for that reason, just for the love of the people. They just found, how can we serve people in their immediate need? And that's really what kept them, bound together. That kept them going forward, and that really inspired people after them. But they were human, and they made a lot of mistakes, but they were just such an important part of history that has been overlooked. And I really just hope that this book sort of gives some love to people who, really have deserved all the flowers for many years. And, unfortunately, some of them aren't able to see it, but I just hope that, folks going forward will really, just see this incredible family for who they are and the work that they did and the work that still needs to be done. If there's no one else, let's go.
I have so many questions I'm trying to formulate. It's more like a dialogue, but first of all, I love what you said about just the individual work of feeding people, caring for people. That is the revolution, I think. And I've been doing a lot of advocacy work for the unhoused communities. And I learned so much from that community. They just take care of each other. And when the city comes in and just bulldoze their homes and their communities, and then they're spread out, lost, and now, they don't have that sense of community connection. That's what's destroying those communities in particular. So we're, the advocates and the residents that are pulling together, it's like, the evictions are brutal. And people coming together to pick the pieces after an eviction, it's intense. We're afraid of losing some folks that are already on the edge, So I love that piece because I feel that in my own activism. What I want to find out is, you said that there was a lot of mistakes. Every generation is going to make mistakes. And so there's this two-part question where, what are we doing right now? And is it just a moving target because we're addressing like the AI, like who knows what AI is going to really do to our society, and even kids on screens. It's changing their makeup. So I'm just curious, it's like a two-part, like what are we doing right? But we also have to understand that we're still learning and growing with forces that want to keep pounding down and locking the kids up in cages, and then of course Palestine, we didn't talk about Palestine and what's happening there, but I think the whole world is finally like seeing the genocide, even people who may not have known about that and they're just learning about it, So yeah, just I don't know if you can grab anything from that. But this is what's going on in my head.
Yeah, it's a little grab bag. What I really cannot speak to like what the work being done in Oakland is in the Bay Area. Because I don't live here, so I don't really know. I totally respect like the people that are actually doing this work and actually still against all odds and against all distractions. I'm unfortunately, regrettably not as up on what's being done here in the community. I feel like that's something that I love. People here can just, this is a community right here, right? And so like people can talk to each other and network. And as far as what people are doing right, I just don't think there's like really, I don't think that's a actual thing to be concerned about. Like what we're doing right, if you feel like it's not easy to see. It's not easy to like check off, okay, we won that one, we're doing something right. It's just like, it's ongoing. It's a fight that you're always going to keep doing, like whatever the issues are and the movements are. To be satisfied with, oh, we're doing something right. I don't. It's easier to see what things have done, what we've done wrong, than just to see what we've done right. Yeah. Right, like.
Well, I mean, we're sort of. We understand that healing is needed. I think maybe that's something.
There's a and
you're saying that personal healing wasn't something that was happening with the clinic, but it seems like there is a sort of consciousness around healing trauma.
And I feel like in their case, I can't speak to too much about what's going on today as far as individual like cities and collectives and groups.
Right.
But with Dr. Shakur, like for him to say, I'm doing something right, this is success, is to save somebody. That is like somebody, like you're saving people, you're seeing them directly. You can see the direct work that you have done helping somebody. With Afeni Shakur helping organize against exploitative landlords, organizing tenant strikes, and teaching them how to open an escrow so they withhold their rent until their needs are addressed. These are things that are just like, they're not worried about, like, is this what is, is this right? What are we doing right? Is this right? It's just like, nope, some people just need some help doing this thing. I was going to help them do that thing. So that's all I can really, that's all I can really speak to is just like what they logged as victories was much more one-on-one. Bigger picture was obviously Black liberation, but that looks like so many different things. And how do we get there? How do we teach self-determination? Just one person at a time and just building this movement, letting it grow, rather than try to look at the big picture and say, well, how do we get to Black liberation? It's like by helping folks who need help, and then building on that. And that's, at least that's my piece. Sorry?
Changing laws and policies.
Yeah, I mean, that's all that boring bureaucratic work too is also part of the work. And it's just like whatever you think is going to help, whatever you think that you can be most successful in or most active in and passionate about, that is every bit as important as what the person who's doing something else is doing. So, yeah, I think that's time. Look, thank you all so much. I have some books for sale back there. I'd be happy to sign them. Please buy some books so I don't have to lug them all the way back to LA. And if you want to talk some more, I'll be back there. Just hanging out for a little bit. And I really thank you so much for all being here, for the great questions, for listening to me talk for an hour and a half. Thanks to the Oakland Public Library and Emily. Thanks, everybody.
Dedicating one to my dad, Michael.
Or MIC.
Really love